Royal Highness, dear Haya, if I can say so. You are a very complete equestrian woman. As a show jumping rider, you became the first woman to represent Jordan internationally and to win a medal in the Pan-Arab Equestrian Games. You also took part in the 2000 Olympic Games in Sydney, where you were the flag bearer for your country. Great honor. Then you became, a little later, the president of FEI for 8 years, a little shorter than me, unfortunately. And you had a great leadership during these 2 mandates, and you developed a strong FEI solidarity program. You also signed a 10-year partnership with Longines, our common partner. As Ingmar de Vos says, your gentleness is masking a strong will, and when you want something, you always obtain it. In 2013, we created together, with Ingmar and you, the International Sports Confederation between FEI and IFHA, which has become our common vehicle to work with the World Animal Health Organization, the OIE, to facilitate the movement of horses around the world and to establish a program of research to fight against disease for horses, and we have been updated by Andrew Harding on the subject this morning. You have also been a very successful owner, and you became the leading owner in Great Britain in 2008. As I always say, and I told you, you remember certainly it, it's not easy to become the leading owner when you are competing against the Maktoum family. You won that year the Epsom Derby with New Approach, and the Queen Elizabeth II Stakes and the Breeders' Cup Classic with Raven's Past. So, as you can imagine, it is a great honor for us to listen to your personal experience during this extraordinary career as the absolute equestrian woman, while being involved in numerous of humanitarian responsibilities. Your Highness, you have the floor.
President Romanet, President Ingmar de Vos, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's one of the greatest honors to be standing here before you today to mark this celebration of the 50th International Conference of Horse Racing Authorities. The strength and reach of your international conference and the International Federation of Horse Racing Associations means that this platform reaches far beyond this room. I do not for a single minute underestimate the semi-centennial privilege that you've given me today. I've been extremely honored to have worked with President Romney and President de Vos for 8 years as President of the International Equestrian Federation. Both of them are gentlemen who I greatly respect for their knowledge, their absolute dedication, and tireless efforts on behalf of horse sports. As regulators, we all appreciate how much time, effort, and discussion goes into structure. But at the end of the day, the structure of any governing body means nothing at all when you don't have the right people involved, and most importantly, in charge. In Louis and in Ingmar, you have the 2 best leaders in sports governance across the board, and I say that genuinely. I'm proud to call them both friends. Together, over the last 9 years, the FEI and IFHA have climbed some huge mountains. And while each federation enjoys complete autonomy and individuality, both exist for one reason and one reason only: the horse. And no matter how many differences the industries believe they have, that shared jewel means that what affects one must affect the other, but also what can be achieved together is far greater than what can ever be done in isolation. But sport comes first. Sport always comes first. It's why we exist. 2 weeks ago, the Group 1 Moyglare Stud Stakes at the Irish Champions Weekend at the Curragh was won by a remarkable 2-year-old filly called Intricately. She was the first Group 1 winner to be trained by 23-year-old Joseph O'Brien after retiring from his brilliant career as a jockey, with 28 Group 1 rides under his own belt. One of the most heartwarming of Joseph's wins was on Camelot in 2012, when he and his father Aidan made themselves the first father and son combination to ride and train a Derby winner. Intricately was ridden for Joseph by his younger brother, Donnacha, and even more incredibly, bred by their mother, Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie's family, the Crowleys, aren't short of breeding results either, having produced the sire of Intricately, Rock of Gibraltar. Anne-Marie herself, a former champion amateur jockey, encouraged all her children to ride and compete in FEI sport. And both Joseph and Donnacha competed internationally, representing Ireland with great success. Joseph won the individual bronze medal at the European Eventing Championships in 2009 with Ice Cool Bailey. This success story at the highest level illustrates that as international federations, we're not only linked just through our service to the horse, but also by a shared community. Anne-Marie herself sets us all an example in proving that excellence in both our industries is possible through working together. Indeed, the FEI and IFHA created a partnership in 2013, the International Horse Sport Confederation. It was an idea that came to life initially after it became apparent to both President Romney and myself how closely we were working together, particularly in harder times. The attacks on both federations when the beautiful filly 8 Bells broke her leg in the 2008 Kentucky Derby, the reactive comms we managed jointly when 21 polo ponies died in a truck in Florida in 2009, and even the backlash that affects us equally on the announcement of doping or medication violations. These are all terrible events that forced and forged what has unfolded into the most natural and mutually beneficial existence for both of our federations. Once we stopped having to be reactive, we set about seeking common goals together. The results were things that have reached and changed our sports. The FEI-IFHA partnership with the OIE is one of the most concrete examples of the incredible things that our two organizations can do when we set our sights on common goals. This breakthrough represents one of the biggest single growth factors for equestrian sport globally, not to mention the resulting socio-economic benefits that came from opening borders to elite sport horses around the world. In 2013, the IFHA and FEI set out with the goal of finding safe and responsible ways to allow the movement of competition horses around the globe. The resulting joint action plan, launched by the OIE, was a conclusion of our efforts. Our project was aimed at governing the international transport conditions and participation of competition horses in compliance with intergovernmental standards already adopted or in process of adoption in the OIE member countries. While we aimed at resolving all of the obvious problems resulting from international movement of sport horses, we did so by establishing a specific framework consistent with the OIE standards for the temporary export of horses, specifically selected for this purpose by private sector under the constant supervision of veterinary services. This work to enable countries and regions to harmonize their provisions while minimizing the risk of transboundary disease transmission. Together, we developed an international biosecurity standard applying to this horse subpopulation, complete with procedures needed to oversee it. The resulting specific standard on the temporary international movement of high health, high performance sport horses and the establishment of equine disease-free zones in countries infected with certain diseases is the next level for these standards. On the subject of wonderful things that can be done in partnership, may I take this opportunity to thank you all for arranging such a fabulous welcome for me when I landed yesterday from Dubai. Wahida winning at Longchamp for His Highness Sheikh Mohammed in his all-blue silks, and the first time for a 2-year-old by Dabawi to win a Group 1 was a very kind welcome for me to Paris. But it escapes none of us who love racing that the squeeze of a very competitive market has changed the outlook of this sport from the start of the 20th century to the 1980s, when it was seen as a big game. And I do consider myself a member of the racing family, and so I consider your worries my own. Many say that in the 21st century, the sport of kings does not have the social relevance it did in the past, and the pinch of economic worries in this country, as well as crowd turnout, casts a huge burden on those who serve the sport here. Across the water in England, replacing the levy system, the not-so-distant loss of the BBC in exchange for Channel 4 and ITV, along with the bespoke racing channels, are all discussion points that encourage an outlook that would seem gloomy. If you ask anyone who knows me, President Romney and President De Vos most especially, I've never been a person who sugarcoated anything I say in my life. I can tell you that I've never seen such a clear opportunity as I do for racing today. As everything in life does, it comes with some effort, but not one that is beyond the sport or anyone in it. It's easy to forget the past, even when tradition and history is probably the single most important key factor that has brought racing to where it is today. In the Victorian and Edwardian eras, racing in England, Ireland, and France represented a circuit that moved as one and acted as one. The things that came about as a result of that unity are the very backbone of what makes racing what it is today. The pattern of top racing and the ability to identify champions, the excellent work done by the IFHA and others to promote best practice, and in particular, the highest standards of integrity throughout sport. Many would say that it is a fact, though, that many other sports have overtaken racing in popularity and relevance compared to even a few decades ago. And I would agree. I think we all do. But I can also tell you that I've spent the last year managing my brother, His Royal Highness Prince Ali's campaign for the presidency of FIFA. The IOC and FIFA are now inextricably linked by certain individuals that have shared between both bodies in a circle of corruption that is fast spiraling downwards. Will FIFA and the IOC implode and beckon a new generation in to come soon? Yes, I think given time they will. But I also think that many good people in both organizations will survive and rebuild them. Nobody should destroy and can destroy those governing bodies because the movements belong to the world, not to bad groups of individuals that operate within them. The self-destruction of these individuals is a direct result of their actions, which has led to their governing bodies tainting the reputation of global sport. And what used to be the cheers of fans for players and athletes has now turned into overwhelming public outcry for change. This outcry has no effect because the actions of those corrupt individuals are within the legal framework in which they operate, and they've become increasingly emboldened because they have nothing to lose. And does this snapshot of global sports not underline the fact that the FEI and the IFHA have two of the best track records in integrity today of any other global sports organization? I think that is highly relevant, and I truly believe for racing it's a game changer. Racing since the dawn of time is the most spectacular spectator sport, and there is a whole section of new fans looking for excitement. But none of this comes without effort. England, France, Ireland, America, and Australia need absolutely to create unity to tackle issues like the harmonization of Raceday rules. As President Romney has already said, how do you expect your racing public, betting audiences, and the hope of new audience if regulations remain confusing to even jockeys and trainers who compete internationally? President Romney's call to eradicate Raceday medication on all continents is absolutely pivotal. The integrity of our sport absolutely depends on this, and the expansion of global racing simply will not happen if this grey area is not addressed. I assure you that as former FEI president, I do understand that this is not easy, but people must recognise that for the greater good, change is necessary. And it's never ever impossible. I urge you, for the sake of your sport, not to put this off much longer. I will share with you my experience in the area of clean sport. It was the second year of my presidency when my federation hit an all-time low at the 2008 Olympic Games, when 5 of our horses tested positive for prohibited substances. I learned a valuable lesson from this. When a governing body has a problem, anything other than being straightforward and honest will not work, and there is nothing to do but deal with that problem head-on. One of the first calls I got was from Louis. He offered kind and sound and wise advice. We created a twin campaign led by Professor Arne Lundqvist and Lord Stevens, and it took 2 years to work out a process and a further 2 years to roll out the recommendations, which included medication substances inconsistencies in non-FEI competitions in different continents. But our membership understood that our future depended on doing the right thing, and we did align, and we finally agreed, even when at times it seemed completely impossible. In London 2012, we were able to deliver a clean Olympic and Paralympic Games, with the benefit of the Clean Sport Initiative, education and awareness. And I'm happy to report that the FEI continued its clean sport record at Rio 2016 as well. Shortly after the 2012 Games, I was in contact with Longines to ask if they would become an FEI partner. I had met Mrs. Haya only once, and I greatly admired the work she does. For me, the call was the first I would make to ask for a real deal that would compare to those brokered by other major international sports federations. Ingmar and I went through the proposal many times before I made the call, and I believed that the federation deserved it, but I didn't ever dare to think it might become a reality. Mrs. Hayek is one of the most straightforward people in the world to deal with, and she came back and her answer was yes, they would consider it. And she told me why. Your federation has proved that it has the integrity and is willing to take on the problems it faces in a clear and honest way. Your sport and the community have proven that they hold the value of true and clean sport above all else, and they're ready to fight for it. I consider this to be in line with our own values. Let's get our people moving. I don't think I'll ever forget those words, nor will I forget sitting down after making that call and shaking like a leaf for 10 minutes. The equestrian community can take credit for earning the attention of Longines, if Mr. Capelli will allow me to say so. They worked for the clean sport portfolio from inside out. Although I do have to tell you, there were 2 very tired gentlemen who worked 23 hours a day for 10 days straight, right up till Christmas Eve in 2012, and they were Ingmar de Vos and Juan Carlos Capelli. And behind them were 2 very determined women, in myself and Mrs. Hayek. But I think it's safe to say that the gift of that Christmas to the FEI community has continued to roll out through the extraordinary generosity and belief of Longines and the Omega Swatch Group and the tireless efforts of Mrs. Hayek, Juan Carlos Capelli, President Romney and President de Vos. There can be no clearer incentive to listen as a global body to the recommendations that President Romney gives you concerning doping and simplification of your rules and regulations. Ladies and gentlemen, the future relevance of racing depends on your willingness to make changes and to reach out to promote racing worldwide. For us, the FEI first started discussing its development program in 2002, but in many ways, this remained a theoretical discussion because the real definition of development was not culturally accepted by the FEI as a whole. The leading nations in equestrian sport saw this more as a program aimed at developing countries, which formed the majority of our membership. There was a well-founded reticence to hand out amounts of cash without due diligence and where there was no framework for what exactly constituted development. And what surprised many was that some of the most practical and life-changing suggestions came from developing countries. And these really focused on how to expand. They called for alignment in rules and simplification in delivery and communication to our stakeholders. They called for global solutions to transport and quarantine problems that were restricting the growth of our sport. They called for the development program that would lead to develop the FEI itself as an international federation, but also trickle down to them in tailor-made packages. They asked for uniformity in media production and media packages of our top series so that smaller nations and bigger nations alike could benefit and seek their own sponsorships. They asked that the FEI seek to diversify its income so it was not only reliant on taxing its members to survive. And they asked also for a transparent system of qualification for officials and appointments to be made according to meritocracy rather than backroom deals. Development is something that should extend to every tier of the governing body itself and its members in packages that are tailor-made. Development can and should be seen as a vehicle that promotes top sport and brings developing nations up towards that level rather than a mechanism that drags the leading nations down in an effort to ensure equality. Once the debate about whether or not to seriously implement development programs evolved to more specific ideas, then it was quickly accepted, and the cultural gap and animosity that had existed between Europe and the rest of the world quickly disappeared. It was clear to everyone that these were ideas that would expand our sport and not a bid for geostrategic shift in balance inside the federation itself. The FEI decided that the functional model of development for the sport was the 30-year-old Olympic Solidarity Programme. The IOC President Rugga kindly allowed us to work with his team to replicate the structure, which was based on a simple matrix which we adapted to our sport. Having a matrix gave us a framework to accept proposals from our members, so long as they fell into the designated areas. Today, we have about 40 national federations from South and Central America and the Caribbean, Central and Eastern Europe, Asia and Africa that have received help from the Olympic Solidarity Fund for mid- and long-term projects under the form of financial assistance, technical assistance and consultancy. We cover areas such as athlete training, coach education, development of our national federation sport structures, the education of national officers, horse welfare, social projects and scholarships. One of the most important lessons that I learned from President Rugga, who is one of the greatest sport leaders of our time, is that development must absolutely and completely be policed. There can never be any conflict of interest of any kind whatsoever, nor can it have any proximity to or involvement with elections or voting positions within an international federation. This is very clear to everyone in the FEI, and it makes all the difference, not just from a visual perspective, but from a sport perspective. When cash is handed out to ensure members vote to stay in power and bring friends to power, then you might as well throw that money in a fire and burn it. Your sport will not improve. But when it's given transparently to members who deserve it, and the programs will make an impact regionally, nationally, and globally, there is growth and development in the IF. Fears about policing development assistance are not a reason not to pursue it. It just means that you have to absolutely make that guiding principle of any development effort and enshrine it in your rules, regulations, and daily functions so that it can never be forgotten. Racing has every chance today to go from what is a magical sport to a global leader. And when you do, the FEI will be stronger for it. I'd like to end today by thanking you all for the work that you do and the sport that you give life to. Racing gave me one of the best days of my life, among many. And I thought to close by sharing it with you. In 2007, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed gave me a beautiful big chestnut colt, New Approach. Bred by Lodge Park Stud, he was a gift we shared to mark the birth of our daughter, Jalila. I'm not sure which was the greater roller coaster ride, having my first newborn baby or trying to digest New Approach's race plans in the season of 2008. Despite the late entry and much discussion, I woke up on the day of the Epsom Derby thinking, this has got to be all just a dream. And when it turned out to be quite true, still a few hours later, I decided to just focus on how completely humbled I felt that I had a runner in the Investec English Derby. If I didn't focus on just that, I was in danger of driving everyone around me crazy, and namely, that would be Sheikh Mohammed. New Approach looked really well on the race day, but then so did everyone else's runners. When the gate sprung open and thereof echoed across the Epsom Downs, you could see that line of muscle either side of New Approach's windpipe go solid. His outline set in one straight line from his pole to his tail, with his jaw locked above Kevin Manning's hands. He started to pull. He was 3 or 4 from the back when Kevin desperately started to try to settle the big horse as he pulled all the way down the hill and to Tattenham Corner. I was at the back of the box, just feeling sick, watching the screen, and Sheikh Mohammed walked right up close underneath it, and I remember his entourage turning to me and shaking their heads. The horse was pulling too hard. No chance, they mouthed, and they turned and walked to the balcony. I looked at New Approach, now stuck in bad traffic, and I must have looked down at my hands and thought again. Just to have this entry is the best thing in the world, and that's all that really counts. But Sheikh Mohammed kept saying, I don't know, I don't think it's over, I just don't know. And then he shouted, gap, go Kevin! Manning and Sheikh Mohammed both saw the same gap. And the next thing I knew, Sheikh Mohammed had grabbed my hand and run me to the balcony. New Approach had the rail and took the lead a furlong out. And he was never going to give it up to Tartan Bearer. I don't remember losing my hat. I don't remember running down past the jockey rooms and out onto the track behind Sheikh Mohammed. I remember him catching the lead reining and handing it to me, then taking it back when he saw how badly my hands were shaking. We led the big chestnut colt past the stand. I remember clearly the sensation of literally being carried next to that horse. I felt like I was completely lifted off my feet by the energy of 120,000 people shouting congratulations and smiling at us. The power of sheer goodwill and joy at seeing a horse run such a brave race is something that everyone at that track had witnessed, and they appreciated it. And as an owner, people show you that kindness, a goodness and a generosity of spirit, and a sense that they've lived it with you. And that, I don't think, you can experience in any other walk of life. Time seemed to slow down, and your head becomes utterly silent with the deafening noise, so that you can look around you frame by frame. I saw the veins that were mottled all over the sweat-drenched chestnut's shoulder beside me. The way the jockey, Kevin's hand, reached out and almost absent-mindedly patted New Approach's neck, then lifted to salute the roaring crowd, and the smile of complete joy on Sheikh Mohammed's face. Thank you to the IFHA and to racing for these moments. I wish you the very best of luck at your conference.
Thank you, Haya. I think it was fascinating because you've been addressing all the major issues and you finish with the feeling of an owner winning a top race, and we've been trying this morning to discuss how to attract new owners. There is one way, an easy way, just to listen to you. Thank you very much.
It's a very hard act to follow. I'm sure you can all appreciate that. Okay, we're here to take up this panel providing aftercare solutions at a global level. I'd like to make a few remarks first, and then we'll hear from other panelists. It's once again my extreme honor to be among such a prestigious group of individuals, people who have maintained a deep passion for horses and for the sport of thoroughbred racing. For such a global sport and business, a conference like this is an imperative and immensely beneficial to all of us that are fortunate enough to attend it. The fact that it's been held here for 50 years speaks to its relevance and to its importance. And now that he's left the room, I'd like to again commend Louis Romanet and his family for their ongoing dedication not only to France Gallo, but also to the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities. For a long time, they've strongly promoted the cause of international harmonization of best practices, rules, and international competition. I don't need to tell you that even at the local level, implementing those best practices can be challenging. It is exponentially more difficult to do so at the international level, where there may be differences, commercial differences, cultural differences, and even ethical differences. As stewards of this sport and of its principal figure, the horse, we've accepted a responsibility for the health and welfare of the horse over its lifetime. And today, myself and our panelists will examine some of those best practices. The term we use as the subject, as the title suggests, is aftercare. This panel is designed to examine some of the ways we're caring for horses whose racing or breeding careers have ended. Today we're going to hear some insights on aftercare from Roly OWERS of the World Horse Welfare, and Jamie STIER of the British Horse Racing Authority. We're grateful to both of them for being here today. And before I introduce those two distinguished gentlemen, I'd like to briefly tell you a little bit about the U.S. Jockey Club's efforts in this area. Jamie, Roly, and I had the opportunity to make presentations on aftercare a few months ago when Godolphin graciously hosted the Lifetime Care for Thoroughbreds Forum at Newmarket. And I'd like to thank everyone at Godolphin, in particular His Highness Sheikh Mohammed, for their inspiration for that meeting, as well as John Ferguson and Diana Cooper of Falcon & Associates, who's here today. Before I describe some of the Jockey Club's aftercare initiatives, I thought it might be beneficial to provide some background on our organization first, for those of you that are unfamiliar. We were formed as a New York membership corporation on February 9th, 1894, so we've been around for a while. Since then, the Jockey Club has continually pursued its mission as an organization, quote, dedicated to the improvement of thoroughbred breeding and racing. Its primary responsibilities then and now is the maintenance of the American stud book in a manner that helps to ensure integrity of the thoroughbred breed. We currently have about 120 members. Our chairman is Stuart S. Janney III, who succeeded the late Ogden Mills Phipps, who passed away sadly this last April. Mr. Phipps understood and deeply appreciated the significance of the IFHA mission, as evidenced by his presence here on this stage just 2 years ago delivering the keynote address, even while dealing with his health issues. With profits from our commercial companies, subsidiaries, the Jockey Club supports a wide range of what we call industry initiatives to improve thoroughbred breeding and racing. They encompass areas such as aftercare, integrity, medication reform, fan and owner development programs, among others. I can tell you that aftercare is a high priority for us, higher today than it had been perhaps even in the past. For a long time, we contended that aftercare was simply a matter of owner responsibility, that the owner of a horse was responsible for the caring of the horse for the duration of that horse's life. And like many of us in our own personal social views, our organizational position on aftercare has shifted over time, as it was undoubtedly influenced by certain high-profile events. Ferdinand, our 1986 Kentucky Derby winner, died in an overseas slaughterhouse. Exceller, a horse that had won 13 stakes races and had placed in 11 more while competing in France, England, Canada, and the United States, and had earned in excess of $1.6 million. He also died in the slaughterhouse. In fact, he was the only horse in history to defeat 2 U.S. Triple Crown winners in a single race. That was Seattle Slew and Affirmed. Today, one of the most prominent rescue organizations in North America is the Exceller Fund, which was created and named in his memory. And then there was the Watershed case in 2010 in the United States of Ernie Paragallo, a prominent thoroughbred owner and breeder who owned the highly successful sire Unbridled Song. He was convicted on 33 charges of animal cruelty for starving and neglecting horses on his farm in upstate New York. He was sentenced to 2 years in jail and fined $33,000. The Jockey Club stewards, Board of Stewards, voted to deny Mr. Paragallo the privileges of the American Stud Book, which prevents him from ever registering foals or conducting any business with the Jockey Club. So providing proper care for horses is the right thing to do. And secondarily, it's the smart thing to do from a business perspective. In a recently published book called The Humane Economy, Wayne Pacelli, the CEO of the Humane Society of the United States, makes that point repeatedly with anecdotes about that organization's work with large companies such as McDonald's, Walmart, and SeaWorld. And in July 2016 Q&A in Blood Horse, Pacelli said, quote, "It's in the interest of every business or trade group that has relied on animals to embrace animal welfare and to make humane treatment a feature of its work." End quote. Back to one of the themes that Brian was mentioning earlier. Unfortunately, good intentions sometimes lead to bad situations, as happened with the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation in 2011. At that time, the TRF was doing the best it could, but there were allegations made that some of the more than 1,000 horses in their sanctuaries were not receiving adequate care. Well, the allegations later proved to be substantially untrue. This episode reflected negatively on the thoroughbred industry as a whole, and there were and still are really critical issues, and other well-meaning organizations have had similar problems as TRF confronted in that year. So for its part, the Jockey Club has begun to make animal welfare and humane treatment a feature of its work. And here's a brief overview of our aftercare efforts, whether wholly supported by the Jockey Club or with others. In 2006, the Jockey Club played a pivotal role in the creation of the Unwanted Horse Coalition, a broad alliance of equine organizations in America that joined together under the umbrella of the American Horse Council to educate the horse industry about the problems of the unwanted horse and provide information about the long-term responsibilities of owning and caring for those horses. In 2008, we created the Retirement Checkoff Program to support the Thoroughbred Charities of America and the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation's novel program involving prison inmates caring for thoroughbreds. The checkoff enabled owners and breeders to support thoroughbred aftercare and welfare programs at the time they were registering their foals via tax-deductible donations submitted with their foal registration with the Jockey Club. And in 2009, we created tattoo identification services. This very simply assists owners in identifying tattooed, and that's what we use in North America as the means for identifying horses, tattoos. Tattooed but unknown thoroughbreds in their possession, which is important for thoroughbreds in their second career. Since its inception, our tattoo identification services is used about 300,000 times annually. And in 2011, we started Thoroughbred Connect, a free online service designed to assist with the placement of thoroughbreds following the conclusion of their racing and breeding careers. To date, more than 2,700 individuals have listed themselves as willing or able to be contacted regarding aftercare of a thoroughbred. And nearly 7,000 individual horses have an individual tied to them in case that horse was ever to necessitate aftercare. And we continue to enhance this service to make it easier for all involved. Also in 2011, we created one of our signature programs called the Thoroughbred Incentive Program. It was introduced to showcase the breed. The thoroughbred breeds many talents at all levels of competition, not just racing, and to encourage the retraining of thoroughbreds once they have finished their racing or breeding career. The program features sponsorship of thoroughbred classes and high point awards at sanctioned horse shows, as well as year-end performance awards and other individual awards for horses and for young riders. From humble beginnings of just 150 horse shows our first year, over the last 4 years, TIP has experienced rapid and impressive growth. Through July of this year, there were more than 2,100 horse shows and events with TIP classes or awards held at 44 states and Canadian provinces. Almost 22,000 eligible thoroughbreds participated in these shows and events, competing for thousands of ribbons, which are highly coveted by those in those events, hundreds of prizes and thousands of dollars in prize money, simply for being a registered thoroughbred. And more recently, in 2013, the sold without pedigree process of the American Stud Book was changed to allow horses to be retired from racing with the Jockey Club, indicating that the horse should no longer be considered a thoroughbred for racing purposes. Unlike the previous sold with pedigree system, horses that are retired from racing are still considered thoroughbreds and may be bred. And we recorded almost 1,300 thoroughbreds as retired from racing since its inception. But finally, perhaps our most well-known aftercare program in North America is the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. We'll call it the TAA. It's a nonprofit organization that accredits aftercare organizations that retire, retrain, and rehome thoroughbreds and raises funds to support them. So it accredits and then raises funds. Initially funded by seed money from the Breeders' Cup, the Jockey Club, and the Keeneland Association, the TAA has established a broad-based, sustainable funding mechanism at virtually every touch point in the thoroughbred's life. A large part of that funding comes from the Jockey Club, exactly $20 from every registration process, whether it's registering a horse as a yearling or in its current year, or even naming. There's a $25 impost that we collect that we return to the TAA. There are 56 accredited organizations at 180 facilities that span 25 states, 2 provinces, and they currently house, with TAA benefits, almost 2,400 thoroughbreds. And the TAA, over its time, has affected now close to 4,000 to 5,000 horses over that 4-year period. So it's been deeply impactful. Since its inception in 2012, about $5.7 million has been awarded to those approved and accredited organizations across North America. I'm proud to say that from 2009 through the first half of 2016, the Jockey Club has devoted substantial resources to aftercare initiatives, and we're happy to say that rate is increasing each year. Aftercare is a high priority for us, and I think those programs I just described are concrete evidence of that. We can do more, and we will. After I wrote this speech a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to pick up the TDN, and I see Barry Weisbort's here as the co-publisher of the TDN, and saw an excellent Q&A with Jimmy Bell of Godolphin. Jimmy's an American, and he is also the chairman of the TAA. And I'd just like to read a section of that Q&A that Jimmy gave to the TDN. Quote, "Before the TAA, I think I was a typical person in this industry regarding my thoughts on aftercare, and I think my path represents what the TAA has come to be about. It's about awareness, and once you become more in tune to it, I think we would all agree that having been in this industry all of our lives, we can recognize some shortcomings and some things that have been overlooked in which we were all deficient. There is no question that the word aftercare didn't come into this nomenclature until 3, 4, 5 years ago. Certain events certainly brought some attention to it, but I think it was as much a realization of how little we as an industry were doing and how much there was to be done. That's one answer, Jimmy said. The other is that these horses, they deserve it, period. It's the right thing to do, and there's no gray area about it. It's a needed and just cause, end quote. I thought that was well said. So with that as a background, I'd now like to introduce Roly OWERS. Roly is the chief executive of the World Horse Welfare. For those of you who may not be familiar with that organization, World Horse Welfare is an international horse charity that improves the lives of horses in the United Kingdom and around the world through education, campaigning, and hands-on care. The organization has a long and rich history, and Roly is going to tell you a little bit about it now. Roly, thank you for being part of the IFHA's 50th International Conference.
Jim, thank you. President Romane, President DeVos, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. Obviously, I was mindful of what Brian said, being a proud Irishman. I'm obviously a proud Brit, and like all Brits, I'm a good European. Slightly ironic that the one time every 2 years when nearly every Brit would be very proud to be European is when the Ryder Cup was on, when the best golfers from Britain and across Europe would take on the best golfers from America. Perhaps relating to the year we're in, Europe gave up the Ryder Cup to America over the weekend, and I'd like to congratulate our American friends for that great victory. But I'm here to talk to you about thoroughbred aftercare and World Horse Welfare's perspective on that. And so I thought I'd just introduce very briefly the work of World Horse Welfare, talk about a case study in South Africa, and then some options and considerations for when we think about thoroughbred aftercare to make sure that we're thinking about the broad perspective. So World Horse Welfare, as Jim has already said, we're a leading charity. I'd like to congratulate the IFHA on attaining their 50th anniversary this year. Not trying to boast, we're 90 next year, but we've been around since 1927 as a campaigning organisation. But I like to always think that World Horse Welfare brings a practical and a realistic approach to horse welfare, and that, I hope, will shine through in my few comments to you this afternoon. And we cover all kinds of horses, whether they be elite thoroughbreds and sport horses, across to leisure horses, horses that are used for food or end up in the human food chain, or indeed the millions of horses around the world that are still used as working equines. 5 brief facts about World Horse Welfare. In the UK, we are the largest rescue and rehoming charity. We have done countless successful campaigns since 1927. We won horse care programmes in 4 continents. We like to think that we address the root causes of welfare problems through education, and we support the responsible use of horses in sport. And so that means that we are an £8 million sterling charity, and we're helping thousands of horses around the world every year. And as I talked about that practical approach to horse welfare, our vision is for a world where every horse is treated with respect, compassion, and understanding. And we believe that we provide greatest impact when we work with the general public, with governments, with sport regulators, and advise them on our practical approach to horse welfare. And so that is reflected in our being advisors to sports regulators around the world, the British Horse Racing Authority in the UK, to the FEI, and so through the national federations of the FEI. And in the UK, we are members of the British Equestrian Federation and the European Horse Network. What does that mean in horse racing? From a UK perspective, we took part a number of years back now in the BHA's review of the Whip and Aintry's review of the Grand National. And we recognise that when we use horses in sport, there is risk associated with that. And it is our responsibility to reduce that risk wherever possible, but understanding always that we can never reduce that risk to zero. And with the FEI, we have had a relationship for over 30 years. And together, we produced the FEI Code of Conduct, which goes at the heart of horse sport, which says horse welfare should always be paramount to competitive and commercial influences. And that is something that reads across all use of horses, however we use them. So Jim has mentioned this already, the issue of responsible ownership. It is from birth until death. It is all about responsible breeding, responsible care, responsible second careers, and responsible end-of-life decisions. And that's why I thought I'd just mention a case study from South Africa, where we run one of our international projects. We work with a number of partner organisations, Highveld Horse Care Unit, the Coastal Horse Care Unit near Durban, and the Cape Town Cart Horse Protection Association. And South Africa, in parts of South Africa, like in many countries, working horses are still used as a means of supporting people's livelihoods. And in these community-based projects, we are all there about training. We are all there about helping horses through helping people. And that is through training of farriers, training of saddlers, training of nutritionists, vets, paravets, and providing everything from first aid to long-term development inputs. And I thought it was an interesting example because in South Africa, like in Lesotho and in places like Cambodia, there is a rural racing sort of business. It is very unregulated, and in places where we've supported, we try and provide, along with the government, some minimum standards of care. And what was also interesting here is that the Coastal Horse Care Unit and the Highveld Horse Care Unit are involved in the rehoming of thoroughbreds that have come off the racetrack in South Africa. And I think the point to reflect on here is when thoroughbreds are in training, when they're in racing, they are surrounded by the best care in the world. When they move to their second careers, we need to consider whether they're going to receive such good care and such basic things as good farriery and good saddlery. So when we think about the options that are available for horses that come off the racetrack, there are two extremes. We euthanize none of them, or we euthanize all of them. Now, clearly, neither of those options is acceptable, and we need to find where the happy medium is, somewhere in the middle. But responsible selling and rehoming is part of responsible ownership. And as Jim has already mentioned, it really does, it's the responsibility of racing to treat its thoroughbreds after their racing careers, because not only is it the right thing to do, and we passionately believe it is the right thing to do from an ethical perspective, in this PR-dominated world, it has also got hugely negative consequences. It is not taken seriously. So there's three basic questions to ask when horses leave the racetrack. Can I find this horse a good home? Is the horse suited to a second career? And most important factor to consider is the quality of life of that individual horse, each and every one of them. And so clearly quality of life is something that dominates the medical profession hugely. And the issues are no different in many respects to that with horses and with thoroughbreds coming off the racetrack. And we need to consider very carefully how we can manage and monitor quality of life. And World Horse Welfare has an initiative called Just In Case, which supports owners to do just that. It is the part of responsible ownership to give an animal a good life, but also to give it a good death. And that's why the issue of euthanasia cannot be ignored. And what was startling in that seminar that Godolphin so kindly arranged back in July was that there are so many barriers to euthanasia around the world. They can be around the availability of euthanasia and the options for, the costs of it, the religious and cultural beliefs against it or for it, and generally people's attitudes towards euthanasia. It is so much easier to sort out the problem tomorrow than grapple with the situation today. And you may find it rather odd coming from a horse welfare organisation, but we do believe that humane horse slaughter can be the right choice for some animal and horse owners, not least because animals that are worth hundreds, indeed millions of pounds early in their life may end up later on in their life not being worth anything at all, and the costs of euthanasia can be considerable. Now, clearly, in doing that, in saying that, it has to be humane slaughter, and it has to mean that that slaughter is done close to the point of where the animal lives. And indeed, University of Bristol research carried out earlier this year recommended that in the UK that there was a more open access for horses to go into the human food chain. But above all here, it is all about quality, not quantity. And we have to be a very clear voice across the horse world that the primary driver for making decisions around euthanasia is quality of life and no other aspects. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. I'd summarise it in these 5 points. Responsible ownership is all about the animal's life from its breeding to its death. We have to consider the training in horse management and the care animals will receive in their second careers. Euthanasia and humane slaughter, it plays a fundamentally important part in supporting the animal's welfare, for those especially that have no future. In all decisions, it has to be around quality of life, not the quantity of it. And we need, as a racing fraternity, to be responsible with the future of our former racehorses. Otherwise, the consequences will be very significant indeed. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Roly, for that very thought-provoking presentation. Jamie Stier is up next. He's the Chief Regulatory Officer, recently named, of the British Horse Racing Authority, and he serves as chairman of its Horse Welfare Committee. He knows this subject well, and you will all know it well, and a lot better by the time he finishes his presentation. Jamie?
Thanks, Jim. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it shouldn't be lost on anyone the significance that welfare is playing in our sport these days. The mere fact that the IFHA have seen fit to have this as a significant topic on the 50th anniversary conference, I think that in itself says where we are going with it. Fundamentally, as Louis explained this morning, the Horse Welfare Committee was established in 2010, and it was established to promote best practice, harmonisation and information exchange on horse welfare matters. It was to establish general guidance on standards of care and safety of horses and developing measurement of these, raise awareness amongst participants and third parties of horse welfare, and to make contact with welfare organisations and other bodies. The committee is an international committee. We have membership from 10 jurisdictions, 10 members from 7 jurisdictions, but we think it represents a truly global perspective. What has the Horse Welfare Committee been doing? Since I joined the Horse Welfare Committee in 2015, we've been working on developing principles of good practice documents and guidelines. Already, Roly, you'll be happy to know, we have approved through the EXCO a euthanasia policy, and that is pinned to the IFHA welfare website. Ongoing piece of work which we hope to conclude when we meet in Montevideo in a couple of weeks' time are documents on managing training and veterinary activities to optimise horse welfare, strategies for reducing and preventing equine injuries during training and competition, racecourse and veterinary equine emergency care procedures, reporting injuries and fatalities, and whip use in racing. Additionally, there's 2 topics which are relevant to today. They are care for racehorses after racing and IFHA minimum standards. As custodians of the racehorse, we, the participants, have a duty of care throughout their life. That includes before, during and after racing. Whether we accept it or not, the society places that responsibility on us. And that's clearly evidenced by whenever you see a horse which has exited racing for some significant period being subject to mistreatment or not being properly cared for, when they appear in the media, regardless of the length of time they've exited our sport, they are, the headline says, racehorse. We need to be responsible for it, and we need to understand that the public will always see the horse as a racehorse. The importance of aftercare solutions are reflected in some of the following figures. The top 5 jurisdictions, these statistics are from the IFHA website in 2014, show that in 2014 alone, 92,000 thoroughbred foals were bred, 242,000 individual horses raced. What we don't know is exactly how many were retired. We know there obviously was a significant number, but there's a gap in statistics, so we've got to be very cautious in using them. But responsibility, as we say, continues for their career beyond that. There's key and moral reputational issues for the sport to consider. And this goes back to saying, once a horse, always a horse. This is Out of Nothing. Out of Nothing was raced 43 times, retired in 2015, was a 3-time winner, 8-time place getter. In February 2016, a member of the public went to a Monmouth-based charity and reported the condition of this horse. It was found to be badly injured, had an injured foot, body score mass of 0, and was covered in infected sores from rain scald. 3 days after this picture was taken, Out of Nothing was euthanased. We cannot and we should not allow those scenarios to arise. The consequences of inaction. It's worth, without trying to delve into too finer details, it's worth quickly taking a look at the New South Wales greyhound industry. In February 2015, on the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Commission, there was a television show called Four Corners. It showed quite graphically what was taking place through undercover filming within the greyhound industry. There was a huge amount of controversy and a huge amount of action followed from it. It didn't feature on one state only, it featured on Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. The difference was that Queensland and Victoria almost immediately set about trying to do something to rescue the situation, to try and show that they were alive to the issues there. As I see it, from the other side of the world, New South Wales, on the other hand, did very little, if anything. As a consequence of that, in May 2015, the state government ordered a special commission of inquiry into the greyhound industry. That commission was led by Michael McHugh, a retired High Court Supreme Court judge, a man who is steeped in racing history, well known around racetracks in Australia, and a man who's generally regarded as being passionate about the sport and, more importantly, loving a punt. Michael submitted his report in July 2016, and it was nothing less than a damning report. Ultimately, it led to a proposal to close down greyhound racing in New South Wales. And it was more or less brought about by inactivity. But some of the key points were evidence of live baiting and that disgraceful word wastage rates of between 50 and 70%, meaning that between 50 and 70% of all pups whelped didn't make it to the racetrack. The greyhound industry didn't appear to be able to satisfactorily answer the questions that were brought forward, simply because they didn't have data, and we'll come back to that again later on. So at the moment, it does appear as though the New South Wales greyhound industry is set for closure. I'd like to read you just one small section of Michael McHugh's report, and it says, like other social institutions, we must answer to the wider community for their behaviour, and that they have a social licence to operate only as long as they perform in accordance with public expectations. 2 words there, social licence. I think you'll find that in the coming years they'll become more and more used and more prominent. So let's dwell on that for a moment. What is social licence? I'd say to you that social licence is, we have social licence when we're accepted by the society. It's rooted in beliefs, perceptions and opinions, and those are all held about our industry by the public. Most importantly, it's dynamic and it's non-permanent, because beliefs, opinions and perceptions are subject to change at very short notice in relation to a particular event or in relation to new information becoming available. Social licence, much like respect, is there to be earned. It's not given. So it must be at first earned, and then it's our responsibility to maintain it. That does tend through into aftercare of racing. That's not racing itself. That covers all aspects of the sport. And we're equally susceptible with the aftercare in the post-race career position of life. Quickly, and Jim commenced to touch on some of this, we should have a look at some of the areas and some of the programs in place dealing with aftercare now. In Australia, the off-the-track program, and this isn't all inclusive, these are examples I should say. Off the track, in Victoria there's 41 acknowledged retraining facilities. That's an increase of 40% in the last 12 months. It's also worth noting that recently in New South Wales, Australia, it was announced that as a result of prize money increases, they would take a levy off the bottom of the prize money, which would produce around about 2 million Australian dollars annually for investment into horse welfare fund aimed at rehabilitating and rehoming every racehorse and thoroughbred in the state. In Japan, in 1997 was founded the Retired Horse Association. More recently, there's been a centralised division established within the JRA to improve the welfare of retiring horses, and they are making significant and real inroads. In the USA, I was going to touch on the Thoroughbred Alliance. I think Jim's covered that quite extensively already. In France, excuse the pronunciation, Ordella des Pistes program has been established through support of Godolphin and the Aga Khan studs. It's also supported across the French racing industry with the aim of a unified aftercare policy for French racing. Activity is well underway and there's been significant improvement made already, and the picture you see there is of an event for retrained racehorses at Deauville held in August, which highlighted the adaptability of the thoroughbred. In Great Britain, we have, amongst many other things, organisations, including World Horse Welfare, retraining of racehorses. It's a charity that continues to grow with over 12,000 ex-racehorses registered since 2008. As active in other disciplines in over 300 individual classes in shows. Some 450,000 pounders available for care and retraining of vulnerable ex-racehorses in 2016, and a new flagship facility has been opened as part of the National Horse Racing Museum in Newmarket. Areas where we must look to improve. I've already mentioned data or the lack thereof. It is challenging, but we must endeavour to put ourselves in a position where we know at each stage of a horse's life, including after racing, what the relevant statistics are. In order to commence a process to endeavour to achieve that, we've, during the last 12 months, conducted a horse welfare aftercare survey. All the information has been submitted. I'm pleased to say that there's been 48 aftercare organisations responded. At the moment, we're trying to make sense of that data, and I don't think it's appropriate for us to delve into it at the moment. It will be discussed at the ICRAF conference in October. But I think we need to properly understand that if without our statistics, we are leaving ourselves open to challenge. We need to have the statistics that might not always tell a comfortable story, but we must be aware of them so we know areas that we need to address, where we should be putting our resources, what research needs to be done, and they will enable us, hopefully, to develop standards to provide optimum care to a horse after its racing career. If we're able to deliver those optimum welfare standards, that provides a mechanism by which we're able to measure ourselves and we are also able to be measured. Where we must also improve, education of participants. Consider our attitudes and policies towards euthanasia, as Roly has said, always in the interest of welfare. We need a clear communication as to what to do as an industry for ex-race horses. We need to dispel the myth of the thoroughbred. We need to be able to talk about the successful stories, their adaptability, their alternative uses, their uses as in mounted police forces, their uses in other forms of therapy, riding for disabled, rehabilitation in behavioural issues. I see in many countries now they're beginning to introduce them into the prison regime, where inmates are able to work with them to rehabilitate and to produce value for them, and that's, by all reports, most successful. One thing we need to do is, by dispelling that myth, is create a greater demand for our ex-race horses. At the moment, we work in a very narrow band. If we're able to dispel the myth, talk about the adaptability, and think about our horses in real terms, we will enable people to see the goodness of them and tell the stories, such as Summon Up the Blood, competing at the Rio Olympic Games. In order to achieve each of those points, we need leadership. We need, in recent years, racing has tended more towards transactional leadership in many areas. And transactional leadership meaning, as James McGregor Burns, a US political scientist, wrote, is where I give you something in return for you giving me something. That is becoming more and more common, and not necessarily should apply in every instance. I'd say to you clearly it doesn't apply in relation to the welfare aspects of our sport, nor to our aftercare. What we're looking for is transformational leadership, where people are going to take people, grow their opinions, they're going to look at the merits, they're going to eventually stimulate them, they're going to elevate their concerns, which will turn them into leaders and potential moral agents. That's what our sport needs. Transformational leadership in this area. The next steps. Jim touched on it. Thankfully, we've had two very good forums with the assistance of Godolphin in Lexington 2015 and Newmarket. In Newmarket, it was recently discussed forming the International Forum for Aftercare of Racehorses. There was a meeting I held, I believe, Jim, on Friday of a steering group, and that will progress and will continue to work towards having a meaningful forum which will enable us, having established standards, to share best practice and bring the racing community along together. We need greater detailed analysis of data, identify the gaps in the data, and then be able to act upon those. That is underway. The sharing of best practice I've touched on, that should be done at a regional level and at an international level, very much along the same frameworks as the IFHA. Ultimately, we would like to think that this has the potential to lead to the adoption of a suitable minimum standard in the IFHA international agreement. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, how much time do we have? On schedule?
You are on schedule because you started 15 minutes later than expected, so you have time for
Great. So with that, we thought we'd
10 minutes easily.
Great. We thought we would do some questions and answers, open the floor. I'd like to just begin with a couple of questions for our panelists. Roly, How does horse racing bridge the gap between private donations and individual support in order to fund the long-term solutions necessary for the adoption, the aftercare, the retraining, and other initiatives that you described? How do you bridge that gap between just shaking the can, getting individual donations, and full-fledged industry support in a sustainable way? What tactics have you been considering?
In terms of raising the funds, you mean?
Fundraising,
Yeah.
because these are expensive initiatives we're talking about here, and that's where Jamie's referring to leadership is necessary.
Yes, and I suppose it comes back to that point that Jamie made around social license, because I think it would be very wrong to get the impression, and I think it's absolutely right, there is a social license for horse sport, for horse racing, but I think horse racing and horse sport has a lot within their own gift, our own gift, to create that license, or at least to create the terms for that license. So I think, in other words, selling the stories, not always, and one of my great bête noires is the thing about welfare always being seen in a negative light, and it's so often when there's fatalities and there's doping and there's actually welfare it should be seen in a very positive light. So I think that is the call and why it is across the board of those involved in racing to be able to be enlightened to support initiatives for thoroughbred aftercare. And so I think there is a need to understand that, and I think if there's an understanding, then people are far more willing to support that.
So setting that framework first, that framework for understanding is what you think is the next vital step.
I think without that, then we'll always, the industry will always struggle. It'll have collection tins and it'll have certain individuals, but it won't get the buy-in of those and the vast majority in the middle. Absolutely. It's the basic thing of any fundraising. You need a really powerful case for support, and that's what this is all about.
Excellent, excellent. Jamie, you've worked in different international racing jurisdictions, so perhaps you can comment on this. There still remains cultural differences on many issues related to welfare. Roly talked about euthanasia, and I think you had a very funny line about explaining to your family before you go to work, what are you going to do today? I'm going to talk about euthanasia. Difficult issues to discuss. Slaughter, another one. What advice might you give to leaders who are positioning their sport in their respective part of the world at a global level? What advice might you give on how you deal with those cultural differences and how positioning the sport as a global sport, not just as a regional or a local activity?
It's a very good question, Jim, and I think you can't ignore culture because the culture's not going to change in many instances. What we can do is try to change the culture within our sport and people's attitudes in relation to that. I think it is a matter very much, as Roly says, there needs to be more positivity out there. We need to make more of the positive story and not use welfare in a reactionary way, whether it be during racing or even after racing. We need to be able to show the good news stories. We talk about horses in the Olympics. We talk about, their versatility, their adaptability, what great animals they are, what level of care is provided to them. And I think you just have to keep on using that transformational leadership, as I say, to embed those thoughts in people to try and bring them forward to be able to be agents on your behalf.
These are tough questions. I note anytime I see a picture of a horse that's been retrained or brought into another discipline, we have them in our shop and we show them. It's always with the individuals beaming and smiling, and those are really great stories, and they're picked up and certainly seen well. Roly, how should racing be proactive in working alongside animal protection groups, government officials, while being aware that of certain organizations that are clearly aiming to stop or smear racing? Much easier for me to ask these questions.
With difficulty. I mean, I think the 2 points there. One is around data, and I think those who seek not to support the sport will always be able to make a lot more noise and potentially have more impact when we don't know, when the industry doesn't know what's happening to the vast majority of its racehorses after. And I think there is dealing with the facts is always puts you in the most powerful position to be in. And I think so, absolutely applaud Jamie's point and agree with it that more needs to be done to track these animals through their lifetime. The other is, I think, people often think of world horse welfare when we're dealing with horse sport or horse racing as a critical friend. Now, we don't set out to be that. We will just give an opinion. I think there needs to be more, sometimes needs to be more transparency when things do not go right, and they do not always go right, and mistakes are made. And we need to make sure, the industry needs to make sure that when it's, as ever, one mistake possibly is acceptable, but the same mistake happening again isn't. And I think that where there needs to be greater openness, greater transparency, not always played out across the media. It can be played out between racing and a particular welfare organisation. But yes, there is a growing level of animal rights around the world. Social media has a huge means of giving that a voice, but that's not something to run away from. That's something to, that has to be faced up to.
Indeed. I'd be happy to open up to the floor. Any questions for our panelists? Yes, sir. We can bring a microphone to you if you just one moment.
India is the land of ahimsa and non-violence. While you have very rightly touched upon what is to be done, how is it to be funded? The government recently brought about almost a sort of legislation that 0.5% of the total stake money won by owners should be set apart for animal welfare fund, and this can be used for the welfare of the horses. Can something be thought on those lines? And even for that, there's a lot of resistance from owners.
Good, Jamie, it looks like you're ready.
Yeah, funding obviously is an issue. It's an issue in everything we do with our horses, isn't it? So I think we need to be open and honest about that. And I know that the forum that we're talking about putting together, that in itself is one topic we're discussing there. You're not going to achieve an international mechanism for funding of welfare because of all the varied and many differences. It becomes the responsibility of the home area, the home authority. In some places it's done through a levy at sales time. A percentage of the vendor's sale price goes into welfare care in sections of the US. As in Australia, we just mentioned taking a slice out of the bottom of prize money for welfare. That also works. In others, it's done through charitable donations. So it's not one size fits all. It is a substantial sum. You heard Barry this morning say that he gives a chunk of money every time his horse, Team Valor retire a horse. Not one size fits all, but it's something that needs to be funded because it has to be done. So it's up to the individual in their area to work that out, but only having done so after they work out what needs to be done.
Clearly, it's the huge issue. How do you fund it? But I think we're making the case that it's a needed and just cause, as Jimmy Bell put so well in the TDN last week. Any other questions for the panelists or myself? Yes, sir. Oh, there you go.
Good afternoon, Ingmar de Vos, FEI. I think it's a very important discussion you are having here, and what I miss a little bit is reaching out to other equestrian sports as one of the opportunities or possibilities for the second career. We have already discussed this within the International Horse Sports Confederation in a very premature way. But the good news is equestrian sport is growing, not only in absolute figures, but also in many regions of the world. And in the development program, FEI Solidarity, where Her Royal Highness Princess Haya referred to, we get often questions about how we can help to transfer the racing horse into an equine athlete capable to do other things. And that's why I think that it's really important that the industry works together on this, and that we establish education programs for retraining, because this is a very specific knowledge. A lot of developing countries don't have it. They would like to have it. I think we should together put up programs to educate this and to create these programs in all parts of the world. I think also the cooperation between national racing authorities and national federations, just to set up this education, but also to do the retraining and to set up the retraining infrastructure and programs. And then what is very important in the end is really to have a responsible transfer of the horse, of the racing horse, to the equine industry. So I think as a conclusion of that, I really would like to invite you to work together with other equestrian organizations like ours, because I think we can contribute a lot to that process and we could bring a lot of solutions. Not for all horses, but for many at least.
The point's taken, and that's one of the things I highlighted in my quick summary of what we've done at the Jockey Club is recognize that 3/4 of their lives are going to be outside of racing, and that we also recognize that we're seeing less and less thoroughbreds in competitions like yours. So we began a program called the Thoroughbred Incentive Program, which has now got about 22,000 thoroughbreds competing in other events and recognized as thoroughbreds. We created incentives, ribbons, prizes, other categories of awards, and that to us, that was a litmus test, and it's worked. So to your point, I think there is room for a great deal more cooperation. Any other questions? Well, thank you. Thank you to our panelists. Give them a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Jim. And I totally support what was said by Ingmar. I think the more we work together, the better it will be to find solutions.